Americans head to the polls in about 6 months to pick their next president. It's shaping up to be a rematch between the Democratic incumbent Joe Biden and Republican former President Donald Trump. Recent polls show they are neck and neck, or that Mr. Trump may even have an edge. A second Trump White House could result in major global changes on everything from security and immigration to climate change. Caroline Malone with a report.
Make America great again.
Donald Trump's Make America Great Again slogan continues to be front of mind for people who want him to be US president again. He's laid out priorities that include deporting migrants crossing the border illegally, which he often calls an invasion. He recently told Time magazine, "I think the National Guard will be able to do that. If they weren't able to, then I'd use the military." Many Trump supporters still falsely believe he won the last election. The former president told Time he's considering pardons for people convicted over the January 6, 2021 Capitol attack, when some of his supporters stormed Congress to try and overturn November 2020 poll results.
One last final point. This is something I think we should...
The Heritage Foundation is a Washington think tank that's created a playbook for a second Trump presidency, including the replacement of many civil servants with loyalists of the Republican leader.
And Congressman Chip Roy of Texas.
Some of these Trump allies have far-right views, such as House Freedom Caucus policy chair and Texas Congressman Chip Roy.
We funded a DHS of $62 billion for Alejandro Mayorkas to continue to have a Department of Homeland Security that's allowing our borders to be wide open and empower China and have fentanyl pour into the communities in Texas and throughout our country.
On foreign policy, Trump has frequently highlighted the failure of some NATO members to commit a minimum of 2% of their GDP to defence spending. 20 out of 32 nations now do give at least that and are focused on supporting Ukraine in its war against Russia. But Trump has also threatened not to support NATO allies that don't meet the military alliance's spending target and instead encourage Russia to, quote, do whatever the hell they want.
There is now a new law on the books requiring a two-thirds majority in the House and in the Senate for an American decision to leave NATO. But that shouldn't reassure anyone because, of course, the mere calling into question of the mutual assistance clause in Article 5, which says that an attack on one member state is an attack on all and will be treated as such. Just calling that into question, as Trump has repeatedly done, including in the last weeks and months, undermines the credibility of NATO with its potential adversaries.
Trump has also in the past called into question climate science, even calling global warming a hoax, although he's later acknowledged humans bear some blame. There are worries a second Trump presidency could walk back President Biden's pro-environment policies and again pull the US out of the Paris Agreement to cap greenhouse gas emissions. These headlines highlight the concern. A second Trump presidency would be a nightmare for the climate, reads one. The climate can't afford another Trump presidency is another. Neighbour Canada seems concerned too, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau arguing a Trump win this November could harm the fight against climate change globally. The feeling is Donald Trump 2.0 would push for change across the board. He's also threatened to gain more control of the US Federal Reserve and the Department of Justice, which is leading 2 high-profile criminal cases against him. The DOJ plan, though, could hinge on how the Supreme Court rules on presidential immunity, with Trump implying that if he is not immune to prosecution and he gets into power again, then he may try to go after his rivals. Caroline Malone, CNA, Washington.
And for more, let's bring in CNA's Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. and Olivia Seong in Beijing. So let's start things off with you first, Nick. In terms of foreign policy, I mean, how do the platforms differ between Trump and Biden? And I guess what's at stake for U.S. global leadership?
Yeah, I tell you, it's interesting because their worldviews are really completely opposite. President Biden is all about multilateralism. Donald Trump is all about nationalism, very much that America first idea. So what that's meant over the last 3.5 years with President Biden in power is really trying to build alliances around the world, in particular in the Asia region, Biden trying to strengthen alliances with many countries. Donald Trump, of course, during his time in office was very much about isolationism, very much pushing that idea that it was all about America, and he was excluding many of the other US allies that had long been allies with the US. But I think when it comes to China, they do seem to align in terms of their views. Both have very much tried to counter China at all costs. And I think we're likely to see that continue if Donald Trump gets in power or if President Biden is re-elected. That continued countering of China in many different arenas, whether that's military aggression in the South China Sea, whether that's unfair trade practices, something that President Biden has often spoken about. So differing views, but certainly some alignment when it comes to views on China.
Some alignment there. So, Olivia, well, then who does China want then as the president of the United States? I mean, which candidate's approach to China do you think aligns more closely with its interests?
Well, Talia, as Nick has just said, there is agreement between those two potential candidates. And the short answer, China probably doesn't really want to see either come to power, but its ideal candidate would be someone who would be willing to cooperate with China, given the fraught bilateral relationship that we've seen over the last few years. And as both have taken a tough stance on China. Now, the Chinese leadership position, though, is quite clear. In March, a senior Chinese official was asked explicitly how he thought the U.S. election outcome would affect bilateral ties. And what he said was that China takes no position on the U.S. election, and he hoped that whoever was elected to the presidency would work with China to advance Sino-U.S. relations. Have a listen.
美国大选是美国的内政，我们对此不持立场。不论谁当选，我们都希望 美方能够同中方相向而行，推动中美关系朝着稳定、健康、可持续的方向发展。
Nick, we do know that there is tough talk on the campaign trail, but at the same time, the U.S. wants China to cooperate with it on helping to resolve some of these global issues like the war in Ukraine. So how much do you think of this talk that we're hearing is just rhetoric versus how Biden or Trump may actually act if they get elected?
Yeah, it's interesting, Olivia, because we hear time and time again from President Biden this idea of not just competition with China, but also collaboration. And those are the areas that the Biden administration has been trying to work on. Things like some shared views on climate change, AI, counter-narcotics, preventing the spread of opioids around the world. So there has been that push to try and find areas where the two countries can work together. But anti-China rhetoric is a staple of the campaign train, especially as we head towards presidential elections. China is a very easy punching bag, really, for any political candidates on the left or the right. That is likely to continue, although behind the scenes and diplomatically, of course, there will be a desire to try and find ways to work together. Olivia, I want to ask you about the issue of Taiwan, because so much is made about the US position of Taiwan. We see US lawmakers heading to the island, the US sending billions of dollars in aid to Taiwan. How does Beijing view that US support of Taipei and the island there?
Well, Nick, I think as you and I have both reported, we have seen that China has consistently said that with the issue of Taiwan, that is its #1 red line and the most important and sensitive issue when it comes to bilateral relations, as we have seen, been angered by warming ties between Taiwan and Washington under the Biden administration, things coming to a head when then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited the South Root Island, Beijing then cutting off dialogue channels with the U.S. And more of the same is expected under the Biden administration if he were to be re-elected. But less is known about how Trump could act if he would be elected once again. He did not answer whether the U.S. would help to defend Taiwan if needed when pressed if he won a second term, although a former U.S. ambassador appointed by him said that Trump would be supportive of Taiwan again if he were to be elected. Although some analysts have also said that the issue of Taiwan does not factor very high on Trump's priority list. So that could be a win possibly for Beijing.
And Nick, you've mentioned that this anti-China rhetoric is part of the campaign trail, for both candidates. But what about the American voters, though? What's the perception regarding the importance of foreign policy in this election? And I guess more importantly, how might it influence their decision?
Well, time and time again, it always comes down to domestic policies. That old expression, "it's the economy, stupid," plays out time and again. And I think this election, we're hearing from voters saying at top of mind is the economy, is inflation, and other domestic policies like immigration and abortion. But perhaps this time around, it could be a little different. I think foreign policy has very much come to the fore over the last few years. In terms of China, we've certainly seen President Biden come out against China time and time again, speak about unfair trade practices, speak about human rights abuses. He has made China central to his whole time in office. And of course, rumbling around in the background are those foreign conflicts in Ukraine and in Israel and Gaza. And many voters are unhappy about those for different reasons. Progressive Democrats are unhappy at the Biden administration's stance towards Israel. They say that the Biden administration has not done enough to protect Palestinian civilian lives in Gaza. And then on the other side of the aisle, there are Republicans who are very unhappy that money continues to pour to a foreign conflict to help Ukraine in its fight against Russia. So it could be that foreign policy certainly plays something of a part when it comes to voters and making up their minds in this election.
Right, we will have to continue this conversation after the break. Nick, do stay with us, and thanks so very much, Olivia.